Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we hope you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Arianna Campbell. Arianna, thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jon.
Absolutely. Arianna is also a shareholder and one of our fearless consultants, and really specializes in process improvement, talent. You've been doing a lot of client experience, employee experience, all of those things. And one kind of common term that you've been actually leading the charge and kind of promoting in the profession is around increasing capacity. So our topic today is about how to create capacity through outsourcing and automation. And so my first question for you, Arianna, is what role does outsourcing and automation play when firms think about how to increase their capacity as an organization?
Well, I think when it comes to outsourcing and automation and the idea of capacity, it's all about identifying the tasks that can be done by either outsourcing or automation so that we are freeing up our people to focus on the things that matter. And the things that matter from firm to firm may differ, but ultimately it comes down to being able to serve our clients better and to be able to have a better experience for our employees as well. So when we can take and automate or outsource the tasks, not the roles, we want to make sure that we're focused on those tasks, especially those ones that are repetitive or manual, or when we think about the level of the task that will help to get everyone at their best and highest use. That's how we create the space for our people to focus on adding more value.
That's great. And I stole a line from you. I'll just go ahead and tell you live here on the podcast. I took a phrase that I've heard you use before. And when I was speaking with a client the other day at a conference, they were talking about ways in which they were just trying to gain capacity in their firm. And I said, and this is what I stole from you. I said, hey, that's great. Continue to think about that. But I also want you to be thinking about what are you going to be doing with that capacity once you have it. So that was definitely an Arianna phrase. And they said, oh my goodness, we actually need to be thinking about that. And as I walked away, I could hear them having that conversation among themselves. What are we going to do with this increased capacity? So that leads me to my next question, which is, as firms really think about, again, those tasks that they could outsource or automate, there's a lot there, right? Just in the terms outsourcing and automation and what that means, and maybe some preconceived notions around it. But what kind of tips or solutions, or how are you helping firms think through this?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, what you called an Arianna phrase, but it's a question that I always ask firms, especially when we are working on process improvement. And that is one place where the conversations were around outsourcing and automation definitely come up, because it's such a big part of process improvement and really streamlining processes. And we know, and I say a lot, that it's really difficult, if not impossible, to automate and outsource an inconsistent process, because if there are a bunch of different ways to do it, then it's really hard to set up an algorithm or to equip someone else with a bunch of different, well, if so-and-so is the person who's the lead on the project, you have to do it this way, or if so-and-so, or if this case, or if the client wants, then if then. So having consistent processes is a really important place to start. But with that, through those conversations in process improvement, the first thing that we talk about is what they're going to do with the capacity. Because what you don't want to do is just go back to doing more of what you've always done. It goes back to the point that I made earlier, is that you want to make sure that you're adding more value. So one of the first things that you want to do is to really have a strategic plan, so that you know the direction that your firm is going in, so that when you think about the question of what are we going to do with the capacity, the answer can be to achieve those things that are on your strategic plan, which should inherently add more value to the firm and more value to the client. From there, you're going to find opportunities within your processes, and that's where we really get into the outsourcing and the automation. And you need to make sure that you're really evaluating your processes to make sure that you're consistent. Throughout all this, you want to be getting your people involved, because people can hear the words outsourcing and automation and get scared. And those aren't scary words at all. We aren't looking to outsource roles. Just to repeat that again, we are really looking to make sure that we're focused on taking the tasks off of our people's plates that they probably didn't want to do anyways. And that's really going to free them up. So those are usually good places to start, especially really making sure that you're taking that people part into consideration, because you want to make sure that you have buy-in from people. And when you have fear because there's not clarity, you find people resisting, like, ooh, I don't want to do that. But it's not because they necessarily don't want to do it. It's just because they don't understand it.
That was great. So a couple questions for you on that. And I love how you started with that strategic plan. And anyone that knows Boomer Consulting and knows what we do, we're always talking about the importance of a strategic plan. So if a firm doesn't have a strategic plan, but they are interested in increasing their capacity through outsourcing and automation, what's your advice to them? Get a strategic plan.
Yes, absolutely. To start with getting that strategic plan, and because that's going to help you to identify where you have the greatest opportunities. If you don't have a plan, then how will you know what direction to take? And when we think about strategic plans, it's not only at the overall firm level, but it's also important to be looking at that in each department within the firm as well. So, think about having what's your strategic plan for your tax department, for your audit department, for your client accounting services, because there are definitely specific things that you have to focus on within the different departments or areas in the firm, but then they should tie back to that overarching strategic plan. So again, outsourcing and automation tie into resources. And when we look and think about, resource allocation, investments in different technologies or strategies that way, when we look at how our processes interconnect, it has to start with a plan, or else how do you really know where you're going?
Yep, absolutely. And then the other kind of question or comment I had on your response there, around getting people involved. And that's something you do a lot when you work with firms on kind of these large firm projects, is really help orchestrating a team, the right team, and then providing the framework for that team to work together successfully. So to our listeners, as they think about how to get people involved around capacity, increasing capacity, automation, and outsourcing, what are some tips you have in terms of how they do that effectively?
First thing is that it's not a top-down approach. The best way to do it is to put together a cross-functional team, because we want people at all levels within the firm. And if you're a firm with multiple locations, being able to get insight from those different locations as well. In order to help, a big part of it is to help with buy-in, but it's also to help to get people involved with making the change. So much of change leadership comes from having people involved at different levels. So think about having, obviously, people at the partner level, but the manager level, the staff level, administrative level, and operations, and also IT, because that'll help to give you kind of a 360 perspective from around the firm. And then when you think about it, when you have those different levels involved, they're also helping to create buy-in and excitement with their peers. So again, instead of people feeling like this initiative for outsourcing and automation is happening to them, they can feel like they're actually participating and helping to make the change happen. It also helps for people's voices to be heard as well. And that way you can also find blind spots that you wouldn't have maybe discovered otherwise. And so we help firms from the facilitation of that, not only in putting together the teams, but also navigating the change leadership and management that goes along with that cross-functional team. And then that's when you see better results. You see outsourcing and automation that sticks.
That's great. So, I know you get to work with a lot of different types of firms. Some firms are maybe further ahead in this area. Some firms may be starting their journey around this area. Can you share with us just a few examples off the top of your head of maybe some successes, like firms that have, maybe they have a strategic plan in place, they got a team that is focused on kind of increasing that capacity. What are some of the wins you see them experiencing by doing this?
Yeah, so the wins that we ultimately see firms experiencing has to do with their people. So as they're looking for ways to leverage the resources of outsourcing and automation, their people are really resonating with that. And, we really are starting to see more of process improvement, which again, outsourcing and automation is a big part of that, being used as a talent strategy, because people don't want to be within their jobs in the profession doing tasks that they know could be handled in different ways. Again, our focus is to get everyone at their best and highest use. So that's the biggest success. Those are the biggest success stories that we see, is when we have the follow-up calls with firms where we're talking about continuous improvement and what we can continually do to make the process better. They say, wow, I came into this looking for efficiency and, really, looking to build the capacity, and we're seeing those things. But the bigger results are with what our people are saying and the feedback that they're giving by not having to be bogged down by those repetitive tasks. So we also see an impact on the client service as well, as you're able to have that time freed up to be able to elevate people, to have them focus on different projects, being more advisory, being more consultative. Again, if we're spending our time on tasks that can be automated or outsourced, that's time that we're not spending adding more value to our clients.
And I think that's a great thing about the workforce today is we are pretty in tune with the tasks that we're doing that could be done by some software or an algorithm. Like, we pick up on that real quickly. And so I think that's a strength a lot of firms have within their walls, on their team, is like, hey, we have people that are really tuned into the opportunities, around this. And I think that's just real exciting.
And that's what's good about having that cross-functional team, is they can bring those different perspectives. And especially some of our newer employees, and heck, it's not even just our newer employees anymore. And when you think about the things that are automated in our everyday life, if we're not being proactive about bringing that into the workplace as well, people become really disengaged, because to your point, Jon, they know that there's a better way that it could be done. They hear what their peers are doing at other firms, and then they're coming in and doing it in a very manual way. And they want to leverage the technology to be able to get the work done. And so if we're not bringing those solutions to them and not giving them a path forward to be able to bring those ideas forward, then we're just missing opportunities.
Absolutely. So as we kind of round out our conversation here, Arianna, I have kind of one big question left for you. And that is, what are kind of the next steps our listeners should take? Maybe they've attended a couple sessions now that conference season has, picked up, and maybe they've heard some sessions around increasing capacity or knowing that their firm needs to start to think about doing things a bit differently. What's your recommendation for some next steps here?
Yeah, so we already mentioned one of the big ones is that if you don't have a strategic plan, that would be the first place to start. If you do have a strategic plan, make sure that you're reviewing it and that it's up to date, and that you've identified areas to start exploring outsourcing and automation. And then to put together a specific strategy around that needs to start with, again, process improvement and getting the right team together to lead that charge. And remember, it's not all going to happen overnight. This is another area of continuous improvement. The other thing that I would mention is talking to your peers. I know that this continues to be a topic of interest within our process circle, which is a community of firms that are focused on process improvement. They're leaders within their firms that are focused on process improvement. And so really looking at how can you, tap into what others are doing as well is a really important piece of the puzzle. So again, Make sure you're looking at your strategic plan. Make sure that you're getting the right people involved in the conversation. Make sure that you're really viewing this as a continuous improvement opportunity, and that you are connecting with your peers so that you can learn from them as much as possible.
Well, Arianna, that was fantastic. As always, thank you for a great conversation, and thank you for being on the podcast. And for our listeners, if you like this conversation between Arianna and I, well, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning, and it's not always Arianna on the podcast. We have other guests on as well, and we always talk about topics that are relevant and important to your firm, whether they fall within leadership, talent, process, technology, or growth. They are critical to your success, and that's where we keep these topics hyper focused. So please go ahead and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks so much. Thanks, Arianna.
Thanks, Jon.